I thought I had it all. A perfect life in sunny Florida and a wedding day to the man I loved, Mark. But moments before walking down the aisle, a careless, muffled conversation revealed a devastating truth. Mark's entire proposal was a financial maneuver orchestrated with his mistress, a ruthless plan to secure my inherited legacy. Overwhelmed by betrayal, I did not flee. Instead, I walked into the ceremony, masking my pain to execute a silent, meticulously calculated revenge. This is the story of how I turned my wedding day into the ultimate stage for my enemy's downfall, using observation, strategy, and cold irony to reclaim my agency and destroy his wicked scheme from the inside out. My name is Jane. And this is the story of how my wedding day, the day I was supposed to trade one life for another, a life of independence for a life of US, became the single greatest act of calculated, silent vengeance I would ever execute. It didn't start with thunder. It started with sunshine, the kind of deceptive, blinding sunshine you only get in Florida, where everything looks golden and nothing is ever what it seems. The air in the bridal suite was thick with the scent of gardenias and expensive hairspray. It was a picture-perfect setting, the kind Mark had insisted on, a lavish, historic estate overlooking the Atlantic. Mark. My Mark, the man who had spent 3 years meticulously crafting a love story that would, in less than 2 hours, turn to ash in my mouth. I remember looking at my reflection. The dress was silk, French lace, an absurdly expensive piece of material that suddenly felt like a perfectly tailored shroud. My mother, bless her oblivious heart, kept adjusting the train, whispering clichés about happily ever after. I smiled, a small, practiced gesture. I was good at smiling. I was better at observation. Mark was everything a woman was supposed to want. Tall, driven, with the kind of confident charm that could sell ice to an Alaskan. He was a rising star in Miami real estate. I was the unexpected beneficiary of an early inheritance. A quiet portfolio passed down from a distant aunt just before I met him. A little over 8 figures. Enough to build a legacy. Enough, apparently, to build a lie. We were supposed to be equal partners. But lately, I've been catching fragments. Subtle shifts in his tone when he talked about the prenuptial agreement, an odd, possessive intensity when he discussed my family's old, undeveloped parcels of land up near Orlando. I dismissed it as wedding jitters. I was a fool. A happy, blinded fool. The only thing that was truly mine that day, besides the money, was my silence. I had always been quiet. Not timid, just observant. I've always believed that the truly crucial information is rarely spoken. It's breathed. It's glanced. It's overheard. The plan was simple. Marry Jane, consolidate the assets, develop the land, and then, 6 months down the line, leverage the legal loophole he'd convinced me was standard procedure to gain controlling interest in my trust. He had it all written down in his head. A perfect, clean sweep. The truth is, I did love him, the man he pretended to be, the way he remembered my favorite obscure classical piece. The way he held my hand across a restaurant table. It was a masterpiece of performance art, and I was the captive audience. That love, that betrayal of that love, is what fueled the cold fire inside me when the truth came. If you've ever had your heart not just broken but shattered by a lie, you know the rage that follows. Don't let this story fade into the algorithm. Subscribe now, before the fear of what you might miss makes you regret not joining this journey of revenge. You wouldn't want to miss the crucial moment, would you? The clock ticked closer to 4 p.m., the time of the ceremony, the moment I was supposed to trade the name Jane for Mrs. Mark Grayson, a title that suddenly tasted metallic and cheap. My maid of honor, Sarah, a girl I'd known since kindergarten, hugged me tightly. You look radiant, Jane, she whispered. I hugged her back, feeling the tremor of a newly forming resolve deep in my core. Radiant. I was incandescent with a coming storm. I needed a moment. A moment of silence before the noise of the ceremony overwhelmed the last vestiges of my independent thought. I told everyone I needed to check my makeup, and slipped out of the suite, down a quiet service hallway that led toward the back gardens. The air was cooler here, shaded by old oak trees draped in Spanish moss. And then I heard it. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't even a heated argument. It was a low, urgent murmur coming from the small, unused utility room tucked just around the corner. 2 voices. One was Mark's. The other was female, sleek, and utterly unfamiliar. I stopped dead, the silk of my dress rustling faintly in the tropical breeze. Curiosity, that small, sharp needle, pricked me. But it wasn't curiosity that held me there. It was the shift in Mark's voice. It was hard. It was commanding. It was a voice I had never heard directed at me. I moved closer, slowly, my satin slipper barely grazing the marble floor. I was about to hear the single greatest lie of my life meticulously unraveled by the architect himself. What they said next would determine not just the fate of my marriage, but the fate of my entire inheritance. The wall was cool against my bare shoulder. I stood there, a bride in a $6,000 dress, eavesdropping on my own life sentence. The muffled voices were a cruel, distorted melody. I could make out Mark's words first, sharper than the woman's. 6 months, I told you. The prenup requires a minimum of 6 months after the transfer. The legal team is ready. Just don't screw this up today, Sarah. Sarah. Not my maid of honor, Sarah. No, this voice was different. Deeper, more aggressive. This Sarah was a co-conspirator, not a friend. I realized then that my peripheral vision, usually so sharp, had missed the subtle, sleek tension of this other woman, the one who had disappeared moments before the ceremony. The woman Sarah sighed, a sound of impatient contempt. Look, Mark, I'm getting tired of the doting fiancé act. Just make sure she signs the final asset consolidation papers this week. Her aunt's trust is tied up in that Florida land. Once the deed is co-signed, we move in. We develop the Orlando acreage. That's the real prize. The marriage is just the delivery mechanism. Delivery mechanism. I repeated the words silently, letting them sink into the perfect white linen of my soul. I was a mechanism. My heart, my future, my inheritance, all just a means to an end. An end shared between the man who was supposed to be my husband, and the woman who was clearly his mistress and business partner. The pieces, the ones I had subconsciously filed away as jitters, misunderstandings, minor red flags, suddenly snapped into a horrific, clear picture. The insistence on the quick wedding, the pressure to consolidate my separate assets for ease of management, a step he claimed was essential for our joint future in Florida. The complex, lawyer-driven language in the prenuptial agreement that I had trusted his legal team to review. They were discussing the dissolution of my life as if it were a quarterly earnings report, cold, clinical, evil. Mark spoke again, his voice regaining that familiar, smooth texture, the one he used on clients and on me. She's too naive to question it. She trusts me implicitly, that's the beauty of Jane. She's quiet, she's loyal, and she doesn't check the fine print. Just be ready to take the jet to the Cayman Islands the moment the transfer clears. We'll be living our life, and she'll be stuck with a divorce, a lawsuit, and a liquidated portfolio. Perfect. Perfect. The word echoed in the utility room and hammered against my eardrums. He didn't just want the money. He wanted the humiliation. He wanted me to be stuck. My body went utterly still. The Florida heat felt like a glacial freeze. In that moment, 2 paths opened up. Path A, I burst through the door, a sobbing, furious mess, exposing him, ruining the wedding, but giving him the chaos he expected and the opportunity to spin the narrative against my emotional instability. I would lose the high ground, and likely a lengthy legal battle. Path B, I remain silent. I walk down the aisle. I play the part. I let him think his plan is flawless. My hand, resting against the cold marble, did not shake. My breathing did not hitch. I chose path B. Not out of cowardice but out of a sudden blinding clarity of purpose. I realized the true power of my silence. A hysterical bride is easily dismissed. A calculating, smiling bride is a weapon. I heard the utility room door handle rattle. They were done. They were coming out. I had less than 5 seconds. I pushed myself off the wall, moving with the practiced grace of someone who had just adjusted her veil, not someone who had just been handed evidence of her complete annihilation. I moved toward the main corridor just as the door opened. Mark stepped out first, adjusting his cufflink, his face smooth, immaculate, and radiating false affection. He didn't see me. He glanced down the empty hall and turned to the woman behind him, Sarah. He gave her a quick, predatory kiss, hard, not tender. She slipped away, down a different corridor, her eyes cold and professional. It was only then that I saw her clearly, not a friend, not a relative, but a sleek, high-powered shark, perfectly dressed. Mark turned, finally seeing me. His smile snapped into place, the loving, golden boy facade. Jane. There you are. 5 minutes to go, my love. Just checking my phone. Everything okay? He asked, walking toward me. His hand reached out for mine, warm, familiar, and now, utterly repulsive. I looked at his eyes, the eyes that had just plotted my financial and emotional ruin. I took his hand. It was time for the show to begin. But he didn't realize that the script had just been rewritten. Not by him, but by the quiet woman in the silk dress. Everything is perfect, Mark, I replied. My voice was even, perhaps a little light, exactly what a nervous, happy bride would sound like. He squeezed my hand, a possessive gesture. He didn't notice the icy stillness beneath my skin. He was so preoccupied with his plan, he couldn't see the silent, cold-blooded switch that had just flipped in the woman walking beside him. We stood at the back entrance, waiting for the fanfare. The music started, Pachelbel's canon in D. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. A hymn of purity for a ceremony founded on pure malice. My father took my arm. He looked proud, teary-eyed. My sweet, oblivious father, who believed in fairy tales and who had encouraged me to take a chance on love after my aunt passed, saying, "Money shouldn't dictate your happiness, Jane." He was wrong. The money had defined the happiness, only it wasn't mine. The doors opened. The walk down the aisle took exactly 60 seconds. But for me, it was a decade-long marathon. Every step was a strategic, internal monologue. Smile, Jane. Look only at him. He is the enemy. He thinks he has won. The guests' blurred faces full of good wishes, all of them witnesses to a fraud. I focused on Mark, standing at the altar, radiating confidence and counterfeit devotion. He was handsome, I'll give him that. A handsome, impeccably dressed thief. I thought of the words, delivery mechanism. I thought of the goal, leave her stuck with a lawsuit. That was when the real plan started to form in my mind. Not just to stop him but to turn his own evil plan against him. He wanted to liquidate my portfolio and take the land? Fine. He wanted a legal loophole to control my trust. Fine. He wanted me to be humiliated. Absolutely not. The only way to win this silent war was to become an actress of such conviction that he would never suspect I knew the script had been doctored. I reached the end of the aisle. My father placed my hand in Mark's. The contact was electric, not with love but with pure, controlled animosity. My focus narrowed. Every action, every word, from this moment on, had to serve a single purpose, the subtractive strategy. I had to remove the value of the prize before he could claim it, all while convincing him I was still the naive, trusting bride. The officiant began the reading. A warm, gentle voice speaking about commitment and shared futures. I looked at Mark. He squeezed my hand again, and this time, I squeezed back a response that felt like a quiet promise of destruction. My heart was no longer breaking. It was hardening. It had become a polished, impenetrable stone. The emotional fallout was deferred, put in a cold storage unit until the war was won. He had mentioned the prenuptial agreement specifically, the 6-month clause after the transfer of the consolidation papers. That was the key. He needed the assets consolidated, under both our names, and then he needed 6 months to legally activate his controlling interest clause. I had to prevent the consolidation, and I had to exploit the 6 months. When it came time for the vows, Mark spoke his with fervor. I take you, Jane, to be my wife, to have and to hold. From this day forward, for richer, for poorer. His voice was so convincing. It was sickening. When it was my turn, I spoke clearly, my voice ringing out across the venue. I lied with absolute conviction. I take you, Mark, to be my husband. The ring. He slipped the flawless, 2-carat diamond onto my finger. It was heavy. It was a shackle. I looked at it, not with affection, but with calculation. It was a tangible asset, now. Everything was an asset, or a liability. The moment of the kiss arrived. It was chaste, public, and utterly repulsive. I forced my lips to move against his, a betrayal of my own body, but an essential component of the performance. The officiant announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The crowd erupted. The music swelled. We were married. Mark smiled the smile of a victorious predator. As he led me back down the aisle, I leaned in, my mouth close to his ear, pretending to whisper something loving. What I actually whispered was a silent oath. "You think you just gained a wife, Mark? You actually just gained a silent, invisible executioner. The game was now officially on. And his biggest vulnerability? His complete and utter confidence in my naive trust. What he didn't know was that the real power in my trust, the power of my money, was about to slip through his fingers. How would I stop the consolidation papers from being signed this week without him realizing I knew the entire plan? The ceremony was over. The paperwork was done, and the marital stage was set. We were officially Mr. and Mrs. Mark Grayson. The name felt like a costume, scratchy and ill-fitting. The reception was a blur of champagne flutes, manufactured joy, and congratulations that felt like condolences. Mark was in his element. He was the perfect groom, charming the distant relatives, laughing easily with my father, making a show of pouring me a glass of water when I claimed a headache. He was laying the groundwork for the doting husband narrative he needed for the next 6 months. He was convincing. Almost sickeningly so. I watched him from across the ballroom. He was networking, really. His business associates, his legal team, the very people who drafted my annihilation, and the key investors he wanted to impress with his new financial stability, my financial stability. They all saw a man who had successfully secured his future. They didn't see the transaction. My immediate objective was twofold. 1. Isolate the consolidation documents. He needed my signature on them this week, as Sarah had confirmed. 2. Initiate the subtractive strategy. I had to start quietly pulling the value from the targets he was hunting. The Orlando acreage was the biggest prize, an old family trust asset that was still technically liquid, not tied up in complex investment vehicles. He needed the deed co-signed and the capital transferred into our joint management fund. I had to think like him. He wouldn't leave those papers lying around. They'd be secure, probably in his personal safe at home, or maybe, even more dangerously, digitized and ready for a remote signing at his office on Monday morning. The irony of the first dance was a bitter comedy. He held me close, swaying to a song about eternal devotion. I felt the heat of his lies radiating off him. My head rested against his shoulder, but my mind was miles away, executing a complicated financial matrix. "You're quiet, my love," he murmured into my hair, his breath warm. "Tired?" "Just overwhelmed by happiness," I lied, lifting my head just enough to give him the wide-eyed, slightly tearful look of a genuine bride. It worked. His eyes softened with self-satisfaction. He was swallowing the bait whole. "We have the flight early tomorrow for the honeymoon," he continued, tightening his grip protectively. "We'll deal with the final paperwork, the asset consolidation, the moment we return, Tuesday, latest. Just a formality, sweetheart." He had just confirmed the timing, Tuesday. That gave me Monday. One full day of silent, destructive maneuvering while he was busy sipping cocktails on a beach, thinking he had me locked down. But the real threat was the honeymoon. The honeymoon wasn't a relaxing trip. It was a distraction. It was insurance against me doing any research. He wanted me physically and mentally isolated for the crucial 48 hours before the signing. I had to find a way to not be isolated. Or, at least, to make the isolation work for me. The reception started to wind down. My head was pounding, not from joy but from the immense pressure of the secret I held. I saw Sarah, the co-conspirator, mingling discreetly. She caught Mark's eye. A brief, almost imperceptible nod passed between them, a signal. The plan was confirmed. I needed an escape route. Not from the marriage yet, but from his immediate physical presence. I grabbed Mark's arm, forcing a delicate pout. "Darling, I know we have to leave soon, but I feel dreadful. The heat, the wine. I just need an hour alone upstairs to reset before the grand exit. Can you manage the goodbyes?" He hesitated, clearly wanting me by his side for the finale. But the doting husband facade was too strong to break. "Of course, my angel. Take your time. I'll tell everyone you've had a long day. I'll be right behind you." He kissed my forehead, a brief, performative gesture, and turned back to his conversation. My chance. I slipped away unnoticed by the main crowd, heading toward the staircase. Not to rest, but to find a communication method, a window to the outside world that he had not anticipated. I needed to call the only person who could help me navigate the complex legal structure of my aunt's trust, before the final fatal papers were signed. And I had only a few minutes before he realized I was gone for too long. I didn't go back to the bridal suite, that was too obvious. Instead, I ducked into a smaller, unused study adjacent to the hall. A room with a thick mahogany desk and heavy velvet curtains. I locked the door and pulled out the small, disposable satellite phone I had purchased months ago, long before the engagement, on a strange impulse. A lawyer I knew had once said, "In Florida business, always have a clean line." I never knew how true that was until this moment. I had only one call to make, to Mr. Harrison, my aunt's old estate attorney, a man I had neglected to keep in touch with, much to my immediate regret. "Mr. Harrison, it's Jane. I apologize for the time, but this is an emergency. A legal emergency. I need to know the specific, non-negotiable legal requirement for the transfer of the Orlando land portfolio from my trust into a joint management account." He was groggy but professional. He asked me to hold, then started relaying the crucial information. "Miss Jane. The trust is straightforward, but the land is unique. Your aunt insisted on a final safeguard. The deed transfer requires not just your signature, but a notarized, physical witness signature of a family member, specifically your father, present at the signing, and it must be verified by a second, independent legal counsel." It was meant to prevent exactly this kind of predatory move. A physical witness. My father. Mark knew this. He had lied by omission, convincing me it was a simple electronic signature process. His plan wasn't just to steal the assets, it was to isolate me so I couldn't access this safeguard. This was the true, deep core of the betrayal, the physical manipulation, the forced isolation on the honeymoon. He wanted me in the Caymans, unable to access my father, while his lawyers fabricated the notary and witness signatures remotely. My heart pounded with cold fury. This wasn't just greed. It was elaborate criminal conspiracy. My plan solidified. I had to destroy his ability to fabricate the signatures and use the safeguard as my own secret weapon. "Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice steady, "I need you to draw up 2 documents immediately. First, a notarized amendment to my trust, temporarily placing the Orlando portfolio under immediate legal hold, citing pending administrative review. Second, a confidential letter to the title company stating any transfer must be personally verified by your firm before Tuesday at noon. Use a technicality. Use any legal jargon that sounds irreversible." He agreed, clearly sensing the gravity. My silent revenge now had a legal backbone. The plan was in motion, but the danger was imminent. The honeypot, the honeymoon, was now a critical strategic zone. I had to go. I slipped the burner phone into a small interior pocket of my dress. Just as I unlocked the study door, I heard footsteps on the hall carpet. Mark. He was looking for me. He found me standing by the fireplace, looking slightly weary but composed. "There you are, Jane." I was worried. "Time for the exit, my love. The town car is waiting. Our flight leaves at 6 a.m. sharp for St. Lucia. 3 days of pure, blissful privacy." The word privacy was a punch to the gut. I gave him a weak smile. "Lead the way, husband." As we made our grand, cinematic exit through the showering of rose petals, my smile was no longer just an act. It was the face of a chess player who had just executed a necessary, dangerous countermove. I was going on the honeymoon. But not as the loving wife. I was going as the spy. I spent the entire silent ride to the airport hotel drafting a single cryptic text to my father. "Don't sign anything from Mark's team until I call you after Tuesday. It's urgent business. Trust me." I deleted the message after he confirmed receipt. We arrived at the airport hotel. Mark was solicitous, protective. He insisted we share one massive heavy suitcase for the trip. "No need for anything else, Jane. Just us." He took the key card for the room and placed his bag down. He was controlling the luggage. He was controlling the communication. He was controlling me. But he didn't realize that in that single shared suitcase, amidst his expensive Italian linen shirts, I had discreetly packed a second, cheap, pay-as-you-go laptop, hidden inside a hollowed-out stack of romance novels. The isolation was his trap. The communication was my counter-trap. The war would now be fought in the digital shadows of St. Lucia. St. Lucia was a paradise built for 2. Turquoise water, white sand, and a villa so private it felt like a gilded cage. Mark was relentless. He orchestrated every moment, every meal, every walk on the beach. He was ensuring I had zero opportunity to communicate or even think clearly. He would not let the shared suitcase out of his sight. He kept my phone, my real phone, charged but stored, citing the need for a digital detox. This control was suffocating, but it was also confirming every facet of the overheard betrayal. The nights were the hardest. Sharing a bed with a man who had planned my ruin was an exercise in absolute emotional containment. I lay awake, rigid, listening to his breathing, picturing the other woman, Sarah, the woman who would take my place once the money was secured. The rage was silent, a high-pitched hum beneath my skin. I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes of pure, heartbroken fury each night, deep beneath the sheets, where the sound of the ocean waves could drown out any stray, silent sob. Then, I put the stone back where my heart belonged, and I planned. Access the legal documents Mark had on him, if any, and maintain the legal hold I placed on the Orlando portfolio until Tuesday. Mark wasn't entirely careless. He wouldn't bring the final consolidation documents with him, but he would have access to his emails, his secure server access codes, and likely a digital backup of his overall strategy. I needed to get to the shared suitcase. On the second day he made a mistake, a predictable one. He suggested a sunset cruise, complete with an open bar. He needed me slightly incapacitated, slightly giddy, to maintain the happy wife illusion and dull my senses. I agreed readily. But I didn't drink. I faked it. Every champagne flute, every tropical cocktail, was discreetly poured overboard or left to sweat on the rail. By the time we returned to the villa, Mark was charmingly, deeply drunk. He collapsed onto the oversized, white sofa, laughing at a joke I hadn't made, my chance. I retrieved the hollowed-out romance novels and the cheap laptop from the suitcase, moving with the practiced stealth of a cat burglar. I plugged it into an obscure outlet behind the headboard, connecting to the hotel Wi-Fi, a public unsecured line, but all I needed for my purpose. The clock was ticking toward Monday morning in Florida. My first action was to check my email for the confirmation from Mr. Harrison. It was there, administrative review hold, verified. The Orlando land portfolio was safe, for now. Mark couldn't transfer it on Monday. He would arrive on Tuesday and realize the window was closed, forcing him to reschedule the signing, a delay that would buy me crucial time. But I wasn't satisfied with a delay. I wanted intelligence. I crept to the sofa. Mark was snoring softly, his jacket rumpled. I found his wallet, and inside not only his ID but a separate, small leather folder. Not the final papers, but a stack of business cards, and a printed piece of paper with an access code, MGR, SV, 45,610.99, an access code. To what? His main server, his digital safe? I sat back down at the headboard, typing the code into a generic cloud storage interface. It worked. And there it was. Not just the consolidation papers but a full, 12-page PowerPoint presentation titled, Operation Florida Sunset, Q1, Q2 Consolidation and Liquidation Strategy. I clicked through the slides, my breath catching in my throat. The betrayal was worse than I thought. Not only was the Orlando land the target, but they also planned to use my inherited cash to pay off a massive, undisclosed debt Mark had incurred during a previous failed venture, leveraging my clean capital to save his business. He was deeply in debt, not a successful real estate mogul. This wasn't about building a life, it was about preventing ruin. And the biggest, most shocking slide? A photo of Sarah, his mistress, with the caption, New Chief Financial Officer and Future Mrs. Grayson. He wasn't even waiting 6 months. The divorce papers were pre-signed and ready for filing the moment the assets cleared. I had just found the entire, wicked, multi-layered blueprint of my destruction. Operation Florida Sunset. The name alone was sickeningly romantic and ruthless. I spent the next hour memorizing every slide, every financial projection, every legal loophole they intended to exploit. It was a masterpiece of corporate deceit, and I was the unsuspecting cornerstone. The plan was predicated on 3 key assumptions, all of which I now knew were false. Jane's blind trust, that I would sign the consolidation papers without reading them. Jane's isolation, that the honeymoon would keep me from accessing counsel. Jane's naivety, that I would be emotionally crushed and ineffective during the resulting legal chaos. I was none of those things anymore. The naive bride had died on the utility room floor. I needed to move beyond defense. I needed to move to attack. My goal shifted from saving the assets to destroying his credibility, his financial network, and his partnership with Sarah. I focused on the specifics. Mark's undisclosed debt was linked to a primary lender, First Coast Capital. A major weakness. If that lender knew the collateral used to guarantee the debt repayment my inheritance was under legal review due to questionable martial agreements, Mark's house of cards would collapse instantly. Revenge isn't about shouting. It's about precision. It's about finding the single, microscopic point of failure in a massive structure and applying the exact, quiet pressure needed to fracture the whole thing. The best way to hit him wasn't to expose the affair. That's emotional noise. The best way was to hit his creditworthiness. I used the pay-as-you-go laptop to compose an anonymous, highly technical email, pretending to be an internal source within Mark's company. The recipient, the head of legal counsel at First Coast Capital. The email was short, precise, and devastatingly effective. It mentioned a pending legal hold on the Greyston Trust Consolidated Asset Fund and included the exact paragraph number from the state's trust law that governs temporary asset freezes during marital disputes. I didn't mention the wedding, the affair, or Mark's name directly. I let the legal jargon and the panic of a major asset freeze do the heavy lifting. Before sending, I covered my digital tracks. 3 proxy servers, a burner email account. I wiped the laptop's history and shut it down. I slid the small laptop and the leather folder back into the suitcase just as the faint light of dawn began to creep into the villa. The night was over. The seed of his destruction had been planted, thousands of miles away, while he slept soundly, dreaming of his stolen millions. When Mark woke up, he was groggy and hungover, but immediately back into the role of the affectionate husband. "Good morning, sleepyhead," he drawled, pulling me into a hug. I held my breath, enduring the contact. "Ready for our last day of peace?" I asked him, smiling serenely. He looked pleased. "More than ready. We fly back tonight. Tuesday we sign and then we are financially indestructible, Jane." Indestructible. The irony of that word was delicious. While he said indestructible, the legal team at First Coast Capital was likely pulling up his entire loan file, reading the anonymous email, and realizing their collateral was about to vaporize. He was confident because he controlled the flow of information. He believed I had no access to the outside world. He believed the only legal reality was the one his lawyers constructed. His arrogance was my greatest asset. We spent the final day swimming, reading, and performing the last act of the perfect honeymoon. I played the part with chilling perfection. I made sure to take plenty of photos he would later see everywhere, a permanent record of the calm before his storm. We landed back in Florida late Monday night. The silence in the car ride home was heavy with anticipation, his anticipation of signing the papers, and mine of watching the dominoes fall. I knew that by the time we reached the house, the legal department at First Coast Capital would have already made a move. His Tuesday signing was about to become the site of his first, public, and utterly confounding professional disaster. Tuesday morning, the day Mark intended to finalize his theft. I woke up early, feeling refreshed and unnervingly calm. I dressed meticulously, choosing a professional, neutral dress, the kind a serious woman wears to a business meeting, not a signing formality. Mark was already on the phone, pacing the kitchen in a tailored suit. He looked energized, excited for his financial victory. "Yes, Attorney Blake, just confirming the 11 a.m. signing. Jane and I will be there. Everything is prepped, right?" He hung up, satisfied. He hadn't received any alarm bells yet. The hold I initiated was administrative and confusing. It required investigation, not a full-blown alert, the perfect, silent delay. At 10:30 a.m., we were about to leave for his downtown office. Mark was checking his briefcase one last time when his work phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. He answered, annoyance plain on his face. "Mark Grayson speaking." "Yes? Who is this?" I watched him. The expression of impatient confidence slowly bled away, replaced by genuine shock, then a mask of forced confusion. "Mr. Davies from First Coast Capital?" "I don't understand." "A temporary suspension of credit facility." "What are you talking about?" "Our collateral is solid. I have to fine of ICE date." He turned away from me, moving into the hallway, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper, but I could hear the sharp edge of panic creeping in. He was fighting. He was lying. He was trying to spin the narrative, claiming a clerical error and assuring Mr. Davies that the Consolidated Asset Fund was stable and ready for transfer. But my administrative hold was a legal ghost. It was undeniable proof of a dispute. He returned to the kitchen 5 minutes later, defeated. The signing was off. "Jane," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A minor bureaucratic nightmare, nothing to worry about. The title company is insisting on a last-minute internal review of the trust documents apparently, a new state mandate. They've delayed the signing until Friday. He delivered the lie smoothly, but the sweat on his brow betrayed him. Friday? I asked, feigning disappointment. But Mark, I was looking forward to simplifying things. This is annoying. Is there anything I can do to help speed up this bureaucracy? I offered help not because I wanted to, but because I wanted access. He immediately shut down the offer. No, my love. Absolutely not. It's a legal technicality. Let my team handle it. You just relax. Think of it as 3 more days of being pampered. I'll be tied up with my lawyers. He needed me out of the way again. But the new delay gave me exactly what I wanted, 3 days of unsupervised access to his home office, while he was busy fighting the financial fallout I had initiated. He left the house in a rush, desperate to contain the damage at First Coast Capital. His goal was no longer the consolidation signing, it was survival. He was fighting the fire, not realizing I had started it with a single, tiny match. I walked into his home office, a room he had always guarded fiercely. The door was locked, but I had observed the sequence of keys on his keychain. He was meticulous, predictable, the second key on the silver ring. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It smelled like expensive leather and desperate ambition. I wasn't looking for legal papers now. I was looking for something more personal, more damning. I found his personal computer, still logged in. And in his personal messages, a conversation with Sarah, dated the day before the wedding. He was discussing the final details of their shared future, including a significant financial transfer to an offshore account. He had a secure, encrypted chat client running. I didn't need to read the entire thread. I just needed to clone the conversation logs. I was moving from financial sabotage to personal exposure, and I only had 3 days before the Friday deadline forced my hand. Mark was terrified. I could sense it, even over the phone when he called to give me vague, frustrated updates on the bureaucracy. He was wasting precious energy trying to reassure his lender that the marital assets were sound, digging himself deeper into a lie. Meanwhile, I was busy leveraging his greatest weakness, his assumption of my incompetence. I cloned the encrypted chat logs with Sarah. These logs contained undeniable proof of financial collusion, the offshore account details, and worst of all for Mark, Sarah's confession that she fabricated documents for his previous failed ventures. This was leverage not just for a divorce, but for criminal charges. But I couldn't use it yet. Exposing the affair and the document fraud too early would just create noise and give Mark the chance to retaliate legally before I secured my own position. I needed to test the waters. I needed to see how far Mark would go to save his own skin now that the money was slipping away. A minor financial disturbance that would force him to contact Sarah publicly. I accessed my bank account, the one Mark knew nothing about, an old student account I had kept active. I made a seemingly random, small transfer, $10,000 to a completely fictitious European consulting firm. The transfer was small enough to be easily missed on an initial review but large enough to trigger an automatic bank fraud alert to Mark's financial monitoring software, which I knew he had running on his main business account too. Watch for anomalies. I wanted him to see a small leak and immediately suspect an external threat, forcing him to turn to his partner in crime for advice. Within 4 hours, Mark called, sounding stressed but trying to sound casual. "Honey, a very strange thing just happened. Did you authorize a wire transfer, a small one, to a group in Luxembourg?" My security software flagged it. I played the confused, slightly panicked wife. "Luxembourg? Oh, my goodness, Mark, no. Is someone hacking us? I haven't done any banking since before the wedding." His voice hardened instantly. "Stay calm, Jane. Don't worry about it. It must be a residual scam, something from before we were married. I'll have my security team look into it. Just don't touch any of your accounts." He didn't suspect me. He instantly pivoted, thinking his accounts were being targeted, not realizing that my random transfer was the bait. He ordered me to freeze the very action he needed to stop me from acting. The moment he hung up, I checked the cloned chat logs. A new exchange had appeared. "Need to talk." Code red. "Someone is sniffing around my personal account. A random transfer to Luxembourg. Are you watching the offshore account? We can't afford a leak right now. Sarah, calm down. It's probably just a script. But move the bulk of the funds from the staging account. Use the Geneva Protocol. I'll secure the new routing number. Don't call me again. Too risky. They panicked. They overreacted. My small $10,000 bait forced them to move a much larger, illegally hidden fund to a new location. They were not strategic thinkers under pressure. They were common, fearful criminals. I now had three things: a verifiable, public legal hold on my main asset, the full, criminal blueprint, Operation Florida Sunset, confirmation that they were actively moving illicit funds using the Geneva Protocol. The Geneva Protocol was the key. It was a well-known, complex money laundering technique that required specific, timed actions. I needed an expert to track that transfer, someone completely untraceable. But first, I had to ensure that when Mark's signing deadline of Friday arrived, the papers would be signed, but the consequences would be catastrophic for him, not for me. I had managed to delay the signing and confirm their panic, but tracking the Geneva Protocol transfer was beyond my capacity. I needed a ghost. My Aunt Helena, the woman who had left me the inheritance and the complex trust, had been a sharp, discreet woman. Before she died, she had given me a single, worn business card with no name, only a symbol, an ancient Greek alpha. The card instructed me to call the number only if my safety or fortune was irrevocably threatened. I used the burner phone, dialing the number carefully. It was answered on the first ring by a calm, gravelly voice. "Alpha. This is Jane," I responded. "I'm irrevocably threatened. I need the Geneva Protocol tracked. I need to know the destination of the transfer, and I need it by tomorrow." A short silence. "Understood." Helena's last instructions were clear. "You will send the cloned chat logs to the temporary address I provide. You will pay me in kind, not in money. The price is simple. You will follow one order I give you, no questions asked, when I deem the time is right. Do we have a deal, Jane?" A hidden partner, operating under my aunt's protection. A strange, conditional deal. But I had no choice. "Deal," I confirmed. I sent the cloned logs and the specific exchange about the Geneva Protocol. Less than 12 hours later, on Thursday morning, Alpha contacted me again. The destination is a holding company in the Seychelles, managed by a shell corporation named Onyx Holdings. The primary beneficiary of Onyx Holdings is a single name. And Jane, this is the twist Mark never saw coming. The beneficiary is not Sarah, Alpha continued. The beneficiary is Mark's sister, Vivian. Sarah is just a front. Vivian is the financial architect. She's the one who originally owned First Coast Capital and sold it quickly when the debt became toxic. She's not trying to help Mark. She's orchestrating his ruin to pay off her own lingering debt. I was stunned. The entire time, I thought I was fighting Mark and his mistress. I was actually fighting a much more complex, calculating enemy, his own family, the true owner of the toxic debt, using Mark and Sarah as pawns to leverage my money and cover their tracks. Mark wasn't the mastermind. He was a desperate accomplice who had been manipulated by his own sister. He thought he was stealing my money. He was actually just retrieving his sister's debt from my assets, a debt he didn't even know existed. The game changed instantly. This wasn't just revenge. It was dismantling a family conspiracy. "What does Vivian want?" I asked Alpha. "She wants the Orlando acreage to be developed using your cash and Mark's business license. The moment the development starts, she pulls the permits, freezes the funds, and takes the entire land asset as payment for her manufactured debt. Mark gets the criminal liability, she gets the profit. My goal was no longer to simply save my money. It was to use this knowledge to set the ultimate trap for both Mark and his sister. I had to let them think they were winning." Mark came home that evening, exhausted but triumphant. "It's settled, Jane. The lawyers worked it out. Complete nonsense. The signing is back on for tomorrow, 11 a.m. It's over. We win." He poured a celebratory glass of expensive scotch. He believed the fire was contained, he believed the asset was secure. I smiled, raising my glass of sparkling water. "To Friday," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "The day everything becomes official." I knew exactly what I needed to do. I had to sign the papers on Friday. Consolidating the assets, something I had fought to prevent. Why? Because the asset wasn't the weapon, the signing ceremony was. I had to execute one final, catastrophic digital maneuver during the signing to transfer the legal liability to Vivian and Mark, while securing my own legal and financial escape. And Alpha's instruction was still looming. You will follow one order I give you, no questions asked. Friday, 11 a.m. The lawyer's office was opulent, sterile, and the perfect theater for a financial crime. Mark, his lawyer, Attorney Blake, and I sat at the mahogany table. The papers were presented. The final asset consolidation documents, moving the Orlando land and my liquid assets into the joint management fund. I was calm. Mark was twitching with barely contained excitement. He thought he was steps away from stealing $10 million and solving all his problems. I pretended to read the documents carefully, a final show of diligence. Mark looked bored, checking his phone, a predictable distraction. This was the moment. The plan was activated, timed to the millisecond. Before coming to the office, I had prepared a special, encrypted USB drive. It contained two things: the cloned chat logs proving Mark's collusion with Sarah and the illegal movement of funds to Onyx Holdings. A meticulously crafted email to the Internal Revenue Service (IRS) and the Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC), detailing the offshore Geneva Protocol transfer and citing the newly transferred consolidated account as the source of the suspicious funds. I excused myself, claiming a restroom break. I walked past Mark's laptop bag, which was resting innocently against his chair. In a single, smooth, practiced motion, I dropped the USB stick into the bag's exterior pocket. He would find it later. He would assume it was his. I returned to the table. "I'm ready to sign," I said. As Attorney Blake handed me the pen, I stalled just for a second. I pulled out my own phone, the one Mark had allowed me to bring as long as I kept it on silent, and typed a single pre-drafted command into a specialized, secure messaging app. The recipient: Alpha. The command was the digital trigger. It remotely activated a pre-programmed timer on a dormant server, set to send the damning IRS, SEC email exactly 60 seconds after my signature was on the paper. I signed the documents. Jane Grayson. The deed was done. Mark signed his name with a flourish, shaking Attorney Blake's hand. "It's finalized. We did it." The transfer was complete. The Orlando portfolio was now formally in the joint management fund, and exactly 60 seconds later, the email was sent, citing the new fund's assets as collateral for the illicit transfer. I had effectively signed over a portfolio that was simultaneously flagged by the highest financial enforcement agencies in the country for fraud and money laundering. Mark's new, consolidated asset fund was toxic from the moment the ink dried. Just as Mark was gathering his papers, ready to celebrate, Attorney Blake's private line began ringing, a persistent, urgent sound. He answered, his face draining of color with every word. "SEC, freezing all assets associated with the newly established Grayson Trust consolidated account." What possible grounds? Mark froze. He looked at Blake, then at me. His triumph had evaporated, replaced by cold terror. "What is it? What freeze?" he demanded. Blake hung up, stammering. "Mark. The SEC, they've issued a preliminary asset freeze on the new fund. It's citing suspicious activity linked to an offshore transfer protocol. The timing. It's the moment your new fund was activated." The chaos had begun. Mark had effectively stolen my clean money and used the signing to link it to his sister's colossal toxic debt. He looked at me, suspicion dawning in his eyes, but I looked back, the picture of shocked, terrified innocence. The silent revenge was now deafeningly loud, and the dominoes had started their fall. The asset freeze meant Mark was now legally and financially trapped in a fund that was under federal investigation, and he was the one who insisted on the consolidation. The next 48 hours were a spectacle of panic. Mark was in lockdown, besieged by lawyers, bankers, and the terrifying, cold indifference of federal investigators. His personal phones, his business accounts, and most importantly, the newly consolidated asset fund, were all frozen. He was legally entangled in a mess of his own making. The irony was perfect. He had succeeded in consolidating my assets, but only so that the government could seize the entire, tainted pool. He tried to blame the lawyers. He tried to blame the bureaucracy. He even tried to blame me, suggesting I had accidentally done something to my old accounts. "Jane, you must have done something. Did you call anyone? Did you click on a strange email?" "Mark," I said, my voice trembling with practiced concern. "I've been nothing but supportive. You told me to stay calm. I haven't touched anything. You and your legal team handled it all. If there's suspicious activity, it must be the people you were doing business with before the wedding. The last line hit him hard. He realized his fatal mistake. In his rush to blame the external forces, he had provided the SEC with enough information to confirm the source of the suspicious funds was tied to his previous business dealings, Vivian's debt. He was running scared. He knew the offshore transfer, the Geneva Protocol, was illegal. He didn't know I knew. He thought the discovery was purely accidental. First Coast Capital, alerted by the initial SEC freeze, formally cancelled Mark's credit facility. His existing debt was called in immediately. Suddenly, the money he needed to develop the Orlando land and secure his future had vanished, and he was being pursued by his own creditors. He was in debt, the money was frozen, and his business was in shambles. I waited until Saturday afternoon. Mark was asleep from exhaustion and stress. I retrieved the USB drive I had planted in his laptop bag. I left it on his desk, open to the cloned chat logs between him and Sarah, including the full text of Operation Florida Sunset and the details about Vivian. I wanted him to see the whole truth, all at once. Not from my mouth, but from the cold screen. He woke up an hour later. I was in the kitchen, making tea, looking calm. I heard his roar from the office. A sound of pure, trapped animalistic rage and realization. He saw the logs, he saw the timeline. He saw that Sarah was merely a pawn, and that his own sister, Vivian, was the true puppeteer who had set him up to take the fall for her toxic debt. He had been so focused on stealing my money, he hadn't noticed he was being stolen from by his own blood. The most powerful revenge is when the victim doesn't need to lift a finger. Mark was now fighting on three fronts: the federal government, his primary lender, and his family. I was merely a bystander, legally bound to him, watching the fire consume his empire. He stumbled out of the office, his face pale, his tailored suit rumpled. His eyes finally focused on me, the quiet woman in the kitchen. He looked at me no longer with affection but with raw suspicion. "You knew," he whispered, the realization finally hitting him. "Somehow, you knew." He didn't accuse me of causing the collapse, only of knowing about it. I stared back, my face perfectly neutral. "Mark," I replied softly. "If I knew, why would I have signed the papers?" The question was logical, unassailable, and the final lock on his cage. He had no proof. But the final confrontation, the one where his entire wicked plan was exposed, was about to begin. He didn't believe my feigned innocence. But he was paralyzed. He needed an enemy he could fight, and a quiet, naive bride was a poor target compared to the SEC and his treacherous sister. His phone rang. It was Vivian. I heard the crackling fury of a mastermind who had realized their perfect plan was unraveling. Mark took the call in the living room, screaming into the receiver. "You set me up. The debt, the SEC, you knew the consolidation would trigger the flag. You used Jane's clean money to pay off your toxic garbage." Vivian's voice was a sharp, hissing counterpoint. She was blaming him for being sloppy, for not securing the consolidation papers fast enough, for allowing the leak. She was throwing him entirely under the bus, securing her own legal distance. Mark threw the phone across the room. He turned to me, his eyes blazing, the perfect fiancé mask completely shattered. "This is your fault," he screamed. "If you hadn't delayed us, if you hadn't insisted on waiting, this is your family's fault, that idiotic trust. It's all gone. The money is frozen, the lenders are suing me," and Vivian just hung up. I stood up slowly, deliberately. I walked toward him. He was breathing heavily, a ruined man in an expensive suit. "It's all gone," I repeated softly. "Mark, I heard you." He stopped, confusion freezing the rage on his face. "I heard you," I clarified, my voice gaining a chilling, low-frequency resonance. "On my wedding day. Outside the utility room. I heard you tell Sarah I was the delivery mechanism. I heard you laugh about leaving me with a lawsuit. I heard the plan, Mark, all of it." His face went from rage to utter, paralyzing horror. The color drained from his skin. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. "So," I continued, my voice cold and surgical, "I went through with the ceremony. I smiled for the photos. I went on the honeymoon. And in the 3 days you thought I was out of the way, I secured my assets and ensured that the moment you touched my money, your entire criminal network was flagged by the federal government. I gestured around the luxurious, suddenly empty room. You succeeded, Mark. You have consolidated my assets. And now, you are officially married to a massive, federally frozen money laundering investigation. You stole nothing. You only signed your name on the biggest liability of your life. The divorce papers I file next week will cite financial fraud and criminal conspiracy, all verified by the SEC's ongoing investigation into the Grayson Trust consolidated account. He lunged for me, a sudden, desperate movement. You conniving, quiet little. I didn't flinch. Don't touch me. I warned, my gaze holding his. The only thing saving you from an immediate police report is the fact that I want the government to clean up your mess, not me. You will receive papers next week. You will sign them without protest. You will waive all claims to the marital assets, which are currently being held by the state, and you will agree to pay all legal fees. He staggered back, the fight completely gone. He was broken, not by my emotion, but by my intelligence. The humiliation was complete. He had lost the money, his career, his mistress, and the sister who had betrayed him, all because he underestimated the quiet woman who overheard a conversation. As I turned to walk away, the burner phone, which I had retrieved from the pocket of my dress, chirped softly, a single text from Alpha. The price for tracking the Geneva Protocol was now due. The single order: do not file for divorce. Wait until he does. I paused. Why? Why give him the control of filing? It was a final twist, and I knew Alpha's command, born from my aunt's wisdom, served a greater, quieter purpose. I didn't file the papers. I packed a small bag, left the rings on the kitchen counter, and walked out of the opulent, suffocating Florida mansion. I was still Mrs. Mark Grayson, the wife of an SEC suspect, but I was free. I checked into a small, quiet hotel near the coast and settled in to observe the final, messy unraveling of Mark's life. I realized why Alpha had given the command: timing and perception. If I filed first, Mark would spin the narrative to his creditors and the public, an emotional wife leaving her husband during a minor financial dispute. But if he filed, it would look like a desperate move to shed a liability, a wife he no longer needed after the assets became toxic. It would be an admission of guilt to every party involved. I waited 3 agonizing days. He was silent. He was busy fighting the legal battle he couldn't win. On the 4th day, I received the official courier delivery: divorce papers. Mark Grayson was petitioning for the immediate dissolution of the marriage, citing irreconcilable differences, and he was offering an extremely generous settlement that included all non-trust-related assets and a full waiver of all claims to the consolidated account, the frozen, toxic one. He wasn't fighting the asset freeze, he was running from it. He thought he was saving himself by divesting from the toxic account and throwing me a small, insignificant bone of compensation. He had inadvertently done exactly what I wanted. The papers arrived with a private, handwritten note from him, scrawled hastily on the letterhead of his lawyer's firm. Jane, you won. I don't know how, but you orchestrated all of this. I'm giving you everything else. Just get the SEC off my back. You got the money anyway. Did you really do all this just for a few million? I smiled bitterly at his final, pathetic misconception. He believed I was driven by the same greed he was. But the truth was, the money was only the collateral. I realized what Alpha's second piece of hidden information had done. Mark's real motivation wasn't purely greed, it was desperation to cover a catastrophic personal secret that went deeper than his sister's debt. Alpha had included one final, cryptic file on the USB drive, which I opened now, a medical file. Mark wasn't just broke. He was suffering from a rare, aggressive terminal illness. His entire plan, the quick wedding, the quick grab, the quick life with Sarah, was orchestrated because he needed the money immediately to fund experimental, illegal treatments he believed would save his life. The Operation Florida Sunset wasn't just about profiting. It was about buying survival. His evil was not just selfish. It was driven by fear of death. He wasn't just a thief. He was a dying man trying to steal a future. The irony was devastating. My quiet revenge, designed to destroy his financial future, had inadvertently stripped him of his only hope for a physical one. I felt a flash of something close to pity, quickly extinguished by the memory of the cold, calculated look in his eyes outside the utility room. The consequence was his own. I signed the divorce papers, accepting his terms. The signature was clean, free, and final. By letting him file, I was protected. By taking his small settlement, I had enough liquid cash to disappear. And by accepting the toxic, frozen asset as my burden, I guaranteed he would never be able to touch the Orlando land again. I instructed Mr. Harrison to immediately file a formal statement to the SEC, clarifying that I was the victim of the fraud, and that the consolidated account was formed under duress. The freeze would eventually lift, but the asset would remain mine, free of Mark and Vivian's claims. My silence, once a symbol of my naivety, was now the weapon that had saved me. I had turned my wedding day into the ultimate sacrifice, a sacrifice of 3 days of freedom for a lifetime of secure power. The weeks following the divorce were intensely quiet. Mark faded away, consumed by the legal and medical battles he couldn't win. Sarah and Vivian were implicated in the SEC investigation. My name, Jane, was cleared. The media coverage was minor, a quick blip about a high-profile real estate couple's sudden divorce amidst asset freezes. They never knew the real story. I regained control of the trust assets, now legally clean and fully separated from Mark's toxic network. The Orlando land was mine, safe, and protected by the strict terms of my aunt's trust. I didn't immediately go back to my old life. I stayed in the small coastal town, embracing the anonymity. I finally allowed myself the space to feel the emotional fallout, the heartbreak I had deferred. It was heavy, like deep-sea diving, but necessary. The tears were for the man I thought he was, not the criminal he became. I didn't hire a flashy investment firm. I became my own. I contacted Mr. Harrison and asked him to set up a new foundation dedicated to helping young entrepreneurs, particularly women, navigate complex legal agreements and protect their assets. My quiet way of ensuring no other naive, trusting Jane fell into a Mark's trap. I invested my capital not in speculative Florida real estate, but in slow, sustainable, ethical projects. My wealth was now a source of empowerment, not a target for greed. One evening, the alpha phone chirped. It was a one-word text: safe. My aunt's last line of defense had done its job. I deleted the number and threw the phone into the ocean. There was no need for ghosts anymore. The real power wasn't in the money, it was in the silence. Mark had taught me the necessity of a mask. I had worn the mask of the naive bride to protect my assets. Now, I wore the mask of quiet competence to protect my peace. I took the small cash settlement Mark had offered me, the insignificant bone, and bought a used boat. I named her the delivery mechanism. A dark, wry joke I would tell no one. I spent my days on the water, far from the polished, deceptive sunshine of Miami. The ocean was honest. It was vast, quiet, and unforgiving, much like my revenge. The empowerment came not from revenge, but from reclaiming my agency. I didn't run. I didn't cry in public. I analyzed the threat, found the weak point, and leveraged their own greed against them. I was the silent, intellectual victor. I thought about my aunt, Helena. Her trust had been a weapon, designed not just to give me money, but to test the character of those who came for it. Mark had failed the test spectacularly. The wedding dress? I burned it in a ritual on the beach, watching the French lace turn to smoke. A final, cleansing act. I had learned the most profound lesson. Trust is not a gift. It is a strategic asset. And from that day forward, I would never, ever confuse one for the other. My quiet victory was complete. It wasn't loud, public, or messy. It was clean, documented, and utterly untraceable. Mark disappeared into the labyrinth of his own legal and personal failures. His fate was sealed not by my hand but by his own greed and his sister's treachery. He thought he was playing chess. He was playing a rigged game of checkers designed by his family. And in the end, I was the only one who truly understood the rules. I found my happiness not in a marital vow but in a personal one: to never be underestimated again. I live a quiet life now in Florida. My wealth is stable, my heart is guarded, and my mind is always analyzing the room. I never seek the spotlight. I am the quiet, successful woman who came close to a disaster but walked away with her fortune, her integrity, and her agency intact. The greatest power is the power they don't know you have. Mark and Sarah's mistake wasn't the affair or the plan. It was assuming that quietness equals weakness and that love makes you blind. They mistook my loyalty for stupidity. They mistook my silence for complicity. If there is a moral to this cold, cinematic tale, it is this: pay attention to the quiet ones. the ones who are not participating in the shouting. Because while everyone else is focused on the performance, the quiet ones are observing the true script, identifying the exits, and planning the final, devastating curtain call. My life is built on observation, strategy, and the irony of fate. I wear the beautiful diamond ring now, not as a symbol of love, but as a trophy of my intelligence. It reminds me that sometimes, the most dangerous weapon is not a scream but a smile. I heard his affair at the wedding. And my silent revenge didn't just destroy his evil plan. It destroyed his entire life, without him ever proving I was the one who pulled the trigger. I walked down the aisle a victim. I walked out a victor. This story is a reminder that the bonds we assume are solid are often just paper. If you felt the cold sting of this betrayal, if you felt the need for justice in this quiet war, then don't just walk away. Subscribe right now. And for those who think I deserved the betrayal, or that Mark deserved a chance, go ahead. Type your lament in the comments below. And tell me why you refuse to acknowledge the power of quiet vengeance.